The moment my stepfather saw me walk into his company's emergency board meeting, his face went from arrogant to ghost white in exactly 3 seconds. I counted. The same man who once told my mother I smelled like poverty and barn animals was now staring at the woman who held 62% of his company's funding, and I was about to pull every single penny. But let me take you back to the beginning, because revenge this sweet needs context. My name is Aurora Murphy. I'm 32 years old, and I grew up on a struggling family farm in rural Nebraska. When people picture Nebraska farms, they usually imagine something from a movie with golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon and a nice red barn. Our farm was more like the before picture in a home renovation show: peeling paint, a tractor that needed a prayer and a good kick to start, and chickens that had more attitude than a reality TV housewife. But here's the thing: we were happy. My mother, Jolene, and I had each other after my father passed away when I was 8. A heart attack took him while he was fixing a fence in the north field. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. Just like that, it was me and Mom against the world, and we made it work. We raised chickens, kept a few cows, grew vegetables, and sold what we could at the local farmers market. I learned to drive a tractor before I could drive a car. I knew how to fix a leaky roof, deliver a calf at 3 in the morning, and make a meal out of practically nothing. We didn't have much money, but we had love. We had each other. And honestly, I thought that was enough. Then Adrian Allen showed up. I was 14 when my mother met him at a farming supply convention in Omaha. She had gone to look at new equipment we couldn't afford, and she came back with a businessman's phone number instead. Adrian was everything our little farm wasn't. Polished, sophisticated, wearing a suit that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. He told my mother he was in consulting, which I later learned was a fancy way of saying he convinced people to pay him for advice he wasn't qualified to give. But Mom didn't see that. She saw a charming man with a nice smile who promised her a better life after years of struggling alone, of working her fingers to the bone just to keep the lights on. Can I really blame her for wanting something easier? Adrian swept her off her feet like a tornado picking up a barn. Fast, overwhelming, and leaving destruction in its wake. They were married within 6 months. I remember the day we moved into Adrian's house in the suburbs outside of Lincoln. Mom kept saying how lucky we were, how this was a fresh start, how I was going to love my new school and my new room and my new life. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Adrian showed his true colors exactly 3 days after the wedding. It started small. Comments about how I chewed too loudly, how I walked too heavily, how my clothes looked like they came from a thrift store, which they did, because that's all we could afford. He would look at me like I was dirt someone had tracked onto his clean carpet, and maybe I was, in his eyes. I was the reminder that his new wife came with baggage, country baggage that didn't fit into his carefully curated suburban life. The first time he made me eat dinner in my room, Mom didn't say anything. He had guests coming over, he explained, business associates, important people, and having me at the table would be, how did he put it, distracting. I sat upstairs with a plate of food that had gone cold by the time I got it, listening to laughter and clinking glasses below me. I was 14 years old, and I already felt like I didn't belong in my own home. Things only got worse from there. Adrian had this way of making everything my fault. If I got a B on a test, I was stupid. If I got an A, I must have cheated. If I spoke, I was being rude. If I stayed quiet, I was being sulky. There was no winning with him. And my mother, my sweet, tired, broken-down mother, just watched it happen. She was so afraid of losing the security Adrian provided that she forgot to protect the one thing that should have mattered most. The moment I'll never forget happened when I was 16. Adrian was hosting a dinner party for some potential business partners. I had been instructed to stay upstairs, invisible as always, but I needed a glass of water and made the mistake of walking through the living room. Adrian spotted me immediately, and instead of ignoring me like usual, he decided to make an introduction. He put his arm around my shoulder, squeezed just a little too hard, and said to his colleagues that this was his wife's daughter, the country girl who still smells like poverty, no matter how many baths she takes. Everyone laughed, polite, uncomfortable laughter, but laughter nonetheless. I stood there, frozen, while Adrian patted my back and told me to run along now. I spent that night crying into my pillow, and my mother never said a word about it. You know what's funny, though? Adrian thought he was so sophisticated, so cultured, so much better than us simple farm folk. But I noticed he bought his wine in boxes and poured it into a fancy crystal decanter before his guests arrived. Like putting lipstick on a pig, except the pig probably had better taste. He was a fraud from the very beginning. I just didn't have the proof yet. That was the night I made myself a promise. Someday, somehow, I would make Adrian Allen regret every single word he ever said to me. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew it would happen. Because country girls might smell like poverty to people like him, but we also know how to be patient, how to work hard, and how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Adrian had no idea what he had started. Before we continue, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Thank you so much for your support. As I got older, Adrian's cruelty evolved. He was smart enough to know that outright insults could backfire, so he learned to dress his contempt in concern. He would tell my mother he was worried about my future because I clearly wasn't college material. He would suggest that maybe I should look into vocational training, something simple that a girl like me could handle. Every word was designed to shrink me, to make me believe I was exactly as worthless as he said I was. And for a while, it worked. When I turned 18 and started talking about college, Adrian laughed like I had told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. He told my mother that they couldn't possibly waste money on tuition for someone who would probably drop out after the first semester. Real college was for people with real potential. His exact words. Maybe I could take some classes at the community college if I insisted on pretending to be smart. So that's exactly what I did. I enrolled at the local community college and worked 3 jobs to pay for it. I was a waitress at a diner, a cashier at a grocery store, and I cleaned offices at night. I slept maybe 4 hours on a good day. My social life was non-existent, but I refused to give Adrian the satisfaction of being right about me. 2 years later, I transferred to the State University on a full academic scholarship. Top of my class, Dean's List every semester. And when I came home to share the news, do you know what Adrian said? He told his friends at their next dinner party that poor Aurora couldn't get into a real school, so she had to go the backdoor route, as if working my way through community college and earning a scholarship was something to be ashamed of. I stopped trying to impress him after that. Some people are so determined to see you as less than them that no amount of achievement will change their mind. Adrian needed me to be beneath him. It was essential to his entire identity. But the real betrayal, the one that changed everything, happened when I was 22. I had come home for Thanksgiving, mostly to see my mother, who seemed to get smaller and grayer every time I visited. Adrian was in his office taking a call, and Mom asked me to bring him some coffee. I walked in just as he was ending the conversation, and I saw something on his computer screen that made my blood run cold. Bank statements, transfers, my mother's name on accounts I'd never seen before. I only got a glimpse before Adrian noticed me and slammed the laptop shut, but it was enough. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I did some digging. Old files. Bank statements Mom had thrown away. Credit card bills that didn't make sense. What I found made me sick. When my mother married Adrian, she sold our family farm. That land had been in my father's family for 3 generations. It wasn't worth millions, but after the sale, my mother had $180,000, money she planned to save for retirement, for emergencies, for my future. In 6 years, Adrian had drained almost all of it. His business investments, he called them. Opportunities that were too good to pass up. My mother had trusted him completely, signed whatever he asked her to sign, believed every lie he told her. And now that money, my father's legacy, was gone. I confronted Adrian the next morning, privately. I thought maybe if I approached him calmly, rationally, we could figure something out. He laughed in my face. He asked me what I was going to do about it. He reminded me that my mother chose him, that she signed those papers willingly, that in the eyes of the law, he hadn't stolen anything. Then his smile disappeared and his voice got very cold. He told me that if I ever said a word to my mother, he would divorce her immediately and make sure she got nothing. Not the house, not a penny of savings, nothing. She would be out on the street at 52 years old with no skills and no prospects, and it would be my fault. "What are you going to do, farm girl?" he asked. Your mother chose me. You're nothing. I left that house and didn't come back for 8 years. My first apartment was what real estate agents call cozy, which is code for so small that 2 mice would fight over who had to leave because there wasn't room for both of them. I had a mattress on the floor, a hot plate, and a determination to never ever need anything from Adrienne Allen again. I threw myself into work, entry-level position at a small investment firm. I was the person who made copies, fetched coffee, and stayed until midnight learning everything I could. While Adrienne was playing big shot businessman back home, I was actually learning how business worked. And here's the thing I figured out about Adrienne during those years. His consulting firm, Allen and Associates, was a joke. I did my research. His business model was basically showing up to expensive lunches, acting important, and occasionally giving advice that he'd read in a magazine on the flight over. His partner, Vincent Hale, did all the actual work. Adrienne just took the credit and spent the money. The whole thing was smoke and mirrors, just like that wine in the fancy decanter. Adrienne Allen wasn't a successful businessman. He was a con man with a good suit and a better handshake, but I couldn't prove it. Not yet. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance as my mother faded away. Our phone calls got shorter. Her voice got quieter. Adrienne had won, and we both knew it. I couldn't save her without destroying her. So I did the only thing I could do. I waited, and I worked, and I planned. 8 years is a long time to wait for anything. But revenge, real revenge, the kind that actually works, you can't rush it. You have to let it simmer like a good stew. And trust me, by the time I was 30 years old, my stew was ready. Let me tell you what those 8 years look like. After starting at the bottom of that investment firm, I worked my way up. Not by being the loudest person in the room, because that was Adrienne's strategy. And look where it got him. I succeeded by being the most prepared, the most thorough, the person who actually read the reports and understood the numbers. My country work ethic, the same thing Adrienne had mocked for years, turned out to be my greatest asset. By 25, I was managing small portfolios. By 27, I was being recruited by bigger firms. And by 28, I did something that would have made Adrienne choke on his boxed wine. I started my own investment fund, Prairie Wind Capital, named after the Nebraska plains where I grew up, the place Adrienne thought was so beneath him. My 2 partners, Rachel and Thomas, were people I'd met along the way who believed in doing business the right way. Honest, transparent, no smoke and mirrors. We focused on regional businesses, companies that needed capital but weren't big enough to attract the major players. The kind of businesses that reminded me of my mother's farm, hardworking people who just needed a fair chance. And we were good at it, really good. By the time I turned 30, Prairie Wind Capital was managing over $40 million in investments. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to matter. Enough to change lives, and as it turned out, enough to catch the attention of a certain struggling consulting firm in Nebraska. The day that proposal crossed my desk, I thought I was hallucinating. Allen and Associates was seeking capital investment, $2.5 million to, and I quote, restructure operations and pursue strategic growth opportunities. In normal language, that meant they were drowning in debt and desperately needed someone to throw them a life preserver. I read that proposal 6 times. I kept waiting for it to make sense, for it to be some kind of cosmic joke. But it was real. Adrienne Allen, the man who had called me worthless, who had stolen my mother's money, who had spent 18 years making me feel like I was nothing, was now begging for investment from a fund he didn't know I controlled. If that's not karma knocking on the door, I don't know what is. I did my due diligence, of course. That's what professionals do. And what I found was even worse than I expected. Adrienne had been lying to everyone for years. His business was hemorrhaging money. The big clients he bragged about at dinner parties had left years ago. The only thing keeping Allen and Associates alive was Vincent Hale, his partner, who actually had talent and relationships. Adrienne was dead weight, but he owned 60% of the company and refused to let Vincent buy him out. And here's where it gets really interesting. I discovered that Adrienne had been taking loans against the house, my mother's house. The one he had put entirely in his name through some legal manipulation that I still don't fully understand. He owed nearly $300,000 to various creditors, and my mother had no idea. But wait, it gets better. While digging through Adrian's expense reports, which I obtained through completely legal channels that I won't bore you with, I found some fascinating line items. $400 a month for client entertainment. Sounds reasonable, right? Except when I traced where that money was going, it turned out to be a subscription to a fancy Cheese of the Month club. Apparently, building a business empire requires a lot of imported brie. I also found emails between Adrian and someone named Brenda. Emails that made it very clear my stepfather had been cheating on my mother for at least 5 years. Emails where Adrian discussed his plan to divorce my mother once he stabilized the business, take whatever assets he could, and start fresh with Brenda. He was going to leave my mother with nothing again, after everything he had already taken. But this time, I had a chance to stop him. My partners were hesitant when I pitched the investment. The numbers didn't look great, they said. The company was poorly managed. Why would we throw money at a sinking ship? Because, I told them, the ship has one good lifeboat. Vincent Hale was talented. The client list, while smaller than Adrian claimed, still had potential. If we could remove the dead weight, there was a real business underneath all the garbage. I didn't tell them about my personal connection. Not yet. This had to be a legitimate business decision, or it wouldn't work. They agreed to move forward, and I began planning the most satisfying investment of my entire career. Here's the thing about revenge. In the movies, it's always quick. Someone wrongs the hero comes up with a clever plan, and 20 minutes later, the villain is defeated while dramatic music plays. Real life doesn't work that way. Real revenge takes patience, precision, and paperwork. So much paperwork. My plan took 18 months to execute. 18 months of careful, methodical work, building the trap piece by piece until there was no escape. Adrian Allen was about to learn that the country girl he despised had learned a few things about business. The first step was the investment itself. Prairie Wind Capital made an initial investment of $800,000 into Allen and Associates. Not enough to seem suspicious, just a firm helping a struggling regional business. We used our holding company name for all communications, which meant Adrian never saw the words Aurora Murphy anywhere. He never attended investor meetings either. Those were beneath him. He left that boring work to Vincent, which was his first mistake. Over the next 18 months, we invested more and more. By the time I was finished, Prairie Wind Capital had put $2.4 million into Allen and Associates. We were the primary financial backer. We held 62% of the company's funding obligations, and Adrian had no idea who we really were. His second mistake was trusting Vincent. I met with Vincent Hale 6 months into the plan. Secretly, of course. I told him who I was, what Adrian had done to my family, and what I intended to do about it. I expected him to defend his partner, maybe threaten to expose me. Instead, he looked relieved. Vincent had been trying to get away from Adrian for years. He knew about the inflated numbers, the fake expense reports, the lies Adrian told investors. He had built real relationships with clients, done real work, and watched Adrian take credit for everything while driving the company into the ground. He wanted out. He just didn't have enough money to buy Adrian's shares. I offered him a deal. Help me. And when this is over, you become CEO of a restructured company with real investment behind it. Betray me, and I'll make sure everyone in the industry knows exactly how Allen and Associates cooked their books. Vincent chose wisely. With his help, I gathered everything. Every lie Adrian had told investors, every inflated projection, every fake client meeting that was actually a golf game, every penny of the Cheese of the Month subscription. I built a file so complete that Adrian wouldn't be able to deny a single thing. While I was building my case, I also reconnected with my mother. This was the hardest part. 8 years of distance had created a canyon between us, and I didn't know how to cross it. So I started small. A phone call here, a lunch there. I told her I was working on letting go of the past, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was working on something involving the past, just not letting it go. What I found broke my heart. My mother had become a ghost of herself. The vibrant woman who had raised me on that farm, who had taught me to be strong and independent, was gone. Adrian had worn her down to nothing. She flinched when he walked into a room. She apologized constantly for things that weren't her fault. She had stopped seeing friends, stopped having hobbies, stopped being anything except Adrian's wife. I also learned she had been diagnosed with early-stage heart problems. The doctor said stress was making it worse. I wonder what could possibly be causing her stress. The final piece of my plan clicked into place when I learned that Adrian was planning a big investor meeting. He wanted to bring in new investors, big money people, to essentially cash out Prairie Wind Capital at a loss. He thought he could charm some wealthy fools into taking over our position while he pocketed the difference. The meeting was scheduled for March 15th, the Ides of March. I'm not superstitious, but even I had to appreciate the poetry. I decided to attend in person as the representative of Prairie Wind Capital. The week before the meeting, I practiced my surprised face in the mirror. You know, the expression I would need when Adrian finally realized who I was. I tried shocked. I tried amused. I tried devastated. Eventually, I settled on something that looked like I had either seen a ghost or eaten some bad sushi. Perfect. I also bought a new suit for the occasion. Navy blue, impeccably tailored, more expensive than anything I had ever owned. When I looked at the price tag, I nearly passed out. It had more digits than my entire wardrobe cost in high school. But this was important. When Adrian saw me, I wanted him to see success. I wanted him to see everything he said I would never be. I made one more arrangement. I called my mother and suggested she come to Adrian's investor meeting. Just for support, I said. Just to be there for him during this important moment. She was confused because Adrian never included her in business things, but she agreed. She had no idea what was coming. Neither did Adrian. Neither did Brenda, the mistress, who received a very interesting anonymous invitation to attend the meeting as a potential investor. All the pieces were in place. 18 months of planning, 8 years of waiting, a lifetime of humiliation. And in 3 days, Adrian Allen was going to learn exactly what happens when you underestimate a country girl. March 15th arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt almost mocking. Blue skies, gentle breeze, birds singing like they didn't know someone's entire world was about to collapse. I woke up at 5 in the morning, which was ridiculous because the meeting wasn't until 2 in the afternoon. But sleep wasn't happening. Not today. I put on my navy suit, the expensive one, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back at me didn't look like the scared 14-year-old who had been banished to her room during dinner parties. She didn't look like the college student working 3 jobs just to prove she wasn't worthless. She looked like someone Adrian Allen should have been afraid of from the very beginning. The meeting was held at the Grand Bellworth Hotel in downtown Lincoln, one of those fancy places with chandeliers and carpets so thick you could lose a small child in it. Adrian had chosen it specifically to impress his potential new investors. He wanted them to associate him with luxury, with success, with the kind of wealth that doesn't need to try. Too bad all of it was built on lies. I arrived 30 minutes early and waited in the lobby, pretending to check my phone while I watched people filter in. First came the potential investors, 3 wealthy individuals Adrian had been courting for months. Then came Vincent Hale, looking nervous but determined. He caught my eye across the lobby and gave me the smallest nod. Then my mother walked in. Seeing her in that moment nearly broke my resolve. She looked so small, so uncertain, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She had dressed up for the occasion, wearing a blue dress I remembered from years ago. It hung loose on her now. She had lost weight. Adrian's brand of love will do that to a person. She didn't see me. She went straight to the conference room, probably wondering why Adrian had suddenly wanted her there after years of keeping her away from business matters. And then, 5 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start, Adrian Allen made his entrance. I have to give him credit. The man knew how to make an impression. Perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect smile. He walked like he owned the building, shaking hands with the potential investors, clapping Vincent on the shoulder, kissing my mother on the cheek like he actually cared about her. The performance was flawless. I waited until everyone was seated, until Adrian had launched into his opening remarks about exciting opportunities and strategic growth, until he was right in the middle of explaining how Allen & Associates was poised for its best year ever. Then I opened the door and walked in. The first person to notice me was Vincent. He quickly looked away, hiding his expression. The potential investors glanced up with polite confusion. My mother frowned, trying to place the well-dressed woman who had just interrupted her husband's meeting, and Adrian. Adrian's face went through 3 distinct phases in exactly 3 seconds. I had been waiting 18 months to see this, and it was worth every single day. First came confusion. His brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. Why was this woman interrupting his meeting? Who did she think she was? Then came recognition. The confusion melted into shock as he realized the woman in the expensive suit, the woman who carried herself like she belonged in boardrooms, was the same girl he had made eat dinner alone in her bedroom. And finally, beautifully, came fear. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear how Adrian's world completely falls apart, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. Your support means everything to me, and it helps me keep bringing you stories like this one. Now let's watch Adrian get exactly what he deserves. I walked to the head of the table, directly across from Adrian, and introduced myself. Aurora Murphy, I said, managing partner of Prairie Wind Capital, your majority investor. The silence in that room was so thick, you could have cut it with a knife and served it for dinner. Adrian tried to recover. His mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land. Finally, he managed to speak. He told the room that there had been some kind of misunderstanding, that this was his stepdaughter, that she was clearly confused about something. I smiled at him. The same polite, cold smile he had given me 100 times over the years. Then I opened my briefcase and started laying documents on the table. The first stack was financial records. Real ones, not the fantasy numbers Adrian had been showing investors. I explained calmly that Allen and Associates had lost 60% of its major clients over the past 5 years, that the company was 3 months away from defaulting on multiple loans, that the growth projections Adrian had presented were, to use a technical term, completely made up. Adrian tried to interrupt, but I kept going. The second stack was expense reports. I highlighted some particularly interesting items, like the $400 monthly for a cheese subscription that was categorized as client entertainment. I asked the room if anyone had been entertained by Adrian's cheese. No one raised their hand. The third stack was the emails. I watched Adrian's face go from red to white as I explained that I had documentation of his plan to divorce my mother, take the house he had illegally transferred into his name, and run off with his mistress, Brenda. I mentioned that Brenda, by the way, was probably wondering why she had been invited to this meeting as a potential investor. Right on cue, the conference room door opened. A woman in her 40s with bottle blonde hair and too much perfume stepped in, looking confused. She saw Adrian. Adrian saw her. My mother saw both of them. And suddenly, everyone understood exactly what kind of man Adrian Allen really was. I announced that Prairie Wind Capital was withdrawing its entire investment, effective immediately. I explained that without our funding, Allen and Associates would be forced into bankruptcy within 60 days. I noted that all documentation of Adrian's fraud had been compiled and would be forwarded to the appropriate authorities. Then I walked around the table and handed my mother a folder. Inside was everything: the emails about the affair, the documents showing how Adrian had stolen her farm money, the records of loans taken against her house without her knowledge, 18 years of lies, all in one neat package. My mother's hands were shaking as she looked through the pages. When she finally looked up at Adrian, there were no tears, just a cold, hard understanding that I had never seen in her eyes before. Adrian started begging. He said he could explain that it wasn't what it looked like, that he loved her. He actually said he loved her, while his mistress stood 5 feet away and 3 potential investors watched in horrified fascination. I leaned in close to Adrian so only he could hear me. "You know what, Adrian? I think you were right about one thing. I do still smell like the country, like fresh air, hard work, and sweet, sweet revenge." Then I stepped back and watched his empire crumble to dust. The next 15 minutes were the most chaotic and satisfying quarter hour of my entire life. Adrian tried to grab the documents from the table, probably thinking he could somehow destroy the evidence and make this all go away. But I had planned for that. 2 security guards I had hired were waiting outside the conference room. They stepped in the moment Adrian lunged, and suddenly the most sophisticated man in Nebraska was being escorted out of his own meeting by 2 very large gentlemen who did not care about his protests. The potential investors left immediately. One of them actually apologized to me on his way out, saying he had no idea Adrian was such a, and I'm paraphrasing here, morally bankrupt individual. He used different words, less polite ones. I appreciated his honesty. Brenda, the mistress, had figured out what was happening by now. She stood in the doorway watching Adrian get dragged away, and her face went through an interesting journey of its own. I think she was calculating exactly how much her future with Adrian was worth now that his money and status had evaporated. The math clearly didn't work out in his favor. She left without saying a word to anyone. That left me, my mother, and Vincent Hale. Vincent stepped forward and addressed the room, or what was left of it. He explained that he had been working with me for the past year to document Adrian's misconduct. He apologized to my mother for not coming forward sooner, but he had been afraid of what Adrian might do. He promised that if given the chance, he would run Allen and Associates the right way. I confirmed that Prairie Wind Capital would be restructuring our investment under new leadership. Vincent would become CEO, the legitimate employees, the ones who had actually been doing good work despite Adrian's mismanagement, would keep their jobs. The only person losing anything was Adrian himself. My mother hadn't moved from her chair. She was still holding the folder, staring at the documents like they might suddenly change into something less devastating. I asked Vincent to give us a moment. He nodded and quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. Then it was just me and my mother, alone for the first time in 8 years without Adrian's shadow hanging over us. I sat down next to her and waited. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone that their entire life has been a lie? How do you comfort a person while simultaneously being the one who tore their world apart? Mom spoke first. She asked me how long I had known. I told her the truth. I had suspected for years, but I didn't have proof until recently. I had wanted to tell her so many times, but Adrian had threatened to leave her with nothing. I was trying to protect her, even if it meant staying away. She nodded slowly. Then she asked why I hadn't just told her anyway, why I had let her stay with him for so long. That question hurt more than anything Adrian had ever said to me. I explained that I was scared she wouldn't believe me, scared she would choose him like she had so many times before, scared that I would lose her completely if I forced her to pick sides. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she started to cry. She apologized for everything, for not protecting me when I was young, for letting Adrian treat me like I was worthless, for being so afraid of being alone that she had sacrificed her own daughter's happiness. She said she knew deep down that something was wrong, but it was easier to pretend, easier to believe Adrian's lies than to face the truth. I held her while she cried. My mother, who had once been so strong, so capable, reduced to this by a man who never deserved her. When her tears finally slowed, I told her what I had wanted to say for 18 years. He fooled you, Mom. That's what manipulators do. They're professionals. You're not stupid. You were just in love with the wrong person. We sat together in that conference room until the sun started to set. My mother told me things she had never admitted before, how isolated she had felt, how Adrian had slowly cut her off from friends and family until he was the only person she had left, how she had wanted to leave so many times but didn't know how to survive on her own. I promised her she would never have to worry about that again. Prairie Wind Capital was successful. I could take care of her. And more importantly, she could learn to take care of herself. It wasn't too late. Her phone rang, Adrian's name on the screen. My mother stared at it for a long moment. Then, for the first time in 18 years, she declined his call. Later that week, I found out something that made the whole situation even more perfect. Remember Adrian's fancy wine decanter? The one he used to make his boxed wine look sophisticated? Turns out it wasn't crystal at all. It was from a dollar store, 2 towns over. His whole life was a dollar store item with a designer label. And one of the potential investors, the one who had apologized on his way out, sent me a fruit basket with a card. The note said it was the best meeting he had ever attended, and that usually these things were incredibly boring. He asked if I did this kind of thing often. I wrote back that it was a one-time performance. Some shows are too good to repeat. 1 month after the investor meeting, Adrian Allen's life had completely fallen apart. The fraud documentation I had compiled was thorough enough that several regulatory agencies took an interest. Adrian's license to operate certain financial services was revoked. His name, which he had spent years building into something respectable, was now associated with scandal. The business community in Lincoln is small enough that word travels fast. Nobody wanted to be connected to Adrian Allen anymore. Brenda, the mistress, disappeared from his life the moment it became clear he had nothing left to offer. Turns out, eternal love and devotion have a price tag, and Adrian could no longer afford it. I heard through Vincent that Adrian actually tried to win her back. Showed up at her apartment with flowers and apologies. She wouldn't even open the door. Funny how that works. Without Prairie Wind Capital's investment, Allen and Associates went through bankruptcy proceedings. Vincent Hale restructured the viable parts of the business under a new name, Hale Consulting, with our firm as a minority investor. He was doing well. Clients who had left because of Adrian were starting to come back, drawn by Vincent's reputation for honesty and competence. Adrian, meanwhile, was forced to liquidate everything. His fancy car that he used to polish every Sunday like it was a religious ritual went to pay creditors. His watch collection, the one he loved to show off at dinner parties, sold at auction. The house, the one he had tried to steal from my mother, was tied up in legal proceedings. My lawyers had found significant flaws in the way Adrian had transferred the deed into his name. The courts agreed. My mother would receive her fair share of the property value, plus compensation for the farm money Adrian had taken over the years. It wouldn't replace everything she had lost, but it was something. It was justice. Adrian moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. I drove by once. Not to gloat, just to see. It was probably the same square footage as my first apartment after I left home, the one where 2 mice would have fought over who had to leave. Life has a funny way of balancing things out. My mother filed for divorce the week after the investor meeting. Adrian tried to contest it, tried to claim she was being manipulated by me, tried every legal trick his cut-rate lawyer could think of. Nothing worked. The evidence was too overwhelming. The judge saw exactly what kind of man Adrian Allen was, and she wasn't impressed. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. My mother walked out of that courthouse looking 10 years younger. She told me it felt like she could finally breathe again. We started rebuilding our relationship, one Sunday dinner at a time. I would drive to Lincoln, or she would come to my place, and we would cook together like we used to on the farm. Simple meals, good conversation. The kind of normal that Adrian had stolen from us for almost 2 decades. Her heart condition stabilized once the stress of living with Adrian was gone. Her doctor was amazed at the improvement. I wasn't surprised. Love might not cure everything, but it turns out removing a toxic person from your life works wonders for your health. One weekend, I drove out to where our family farm used to be. Different owners now, different crops, different everything. But standing there in the field where I had learned to drive a tractor, where my father had taught me that hard work was its own reward, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Adrian had spent 18 years trying to make me ashamed of where I came from. He called me poor, unsophisticated, worthless. But everything good about me, my work ethic, my determination, my ability to plan for the long term, all of it came from that farm, from my parents, from the values they taught me before Adrian ever entered our lives. The poverty he mocked was actually richness, love, integrity, resilience. You can't buy those things, no matter how expensive your suit is. Speaking of Adrian, I heard through the grapevine that he tried to start a new consulting business from his apartment. His first and only client was his own mother, who apparently felt sorry for him. She fired him after 2 weeks. Even she couldn't pretend he was competent. My mom started dating again about 6 months after the divorce, a retired veterinarian named Harold who she met at a community gardening class. He's kind, patient, and genuinely interested in what she has to say. When I met him for the first time, he spent 20 minutes asking about my work and actually listening to the answers. I told my mother I approved. At least this one actually likes animals, I said, instead of just acting like one. She laughed, a real laugh. the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. That sound alone made everything worth it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did to Adrian, if I feel guilty for destroying his life so completely, if maybe I went too far. The answer is no. I didn't destroy Adrian Allen for fun. I didn't do it out of petty revenge or because I enjoyed watching someone suffer. I did it because some people only understand consequences. Adrian spent his entire life using others, lying to others, hurting others, and facing zero repercussions. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his charm and his suits and his confidence made him invincible. He was wrong. Bullies like Adrian count on their victims staying silent. They count on shame and fear keeping people in line. The moment someone stands up, the moment someone refuses to be small anymore, the whole facade crumbles. Adrian's power was never real. It was just smoke and mirrors, like everything else about him. About 6 months after everything happened, I received an email from Adrian. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a half apology, the worst kind. He blamed his childhood, his stress, his business pressures. He said he never meant to hurt anyone, that things had just gotten out of control. He hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive him someday. Notice what was missing. Any actual acknowledgement of what he did, any genuine remorse for the specific pain he caused, any acceptance of responsibility. I didn't respond. Some people don't deserve closure. Adrian would have to find his own peace, assuming he was even capable of such a thing. I had more important things to focus on. My mother is doing well now. She lives in a small cottage about 20 minutes from my apartment, close enough to visit, but far enough to have her own life. She's taken up painting, something she always wanted to try, but Adrian said was a waste of time. Her landscapes aren't going to hang in museums, but she loves creating them. That's what matters. Our Sunday dinners have become a tradition. Sometimes it's just the two of us. Sometimes Vincent Hale and his wife join us, an unlikely friendship born from very unlikely circumstances. Sometimes Harold comes, and I get to watch my mother be happy with someone who actually deserves her. Prairie Wind Capital continues to grow. We've expanded our focus, specifically looking for opportunities to invest in people who have been underestimated, women starting businesses after divorce, young entrepreneurs from rural areas, anyone who reminds me of myself at 22, determined but overlooked. Last month, I attended a charity gala in Omaha. Fancy venue, important people. The kind of event Adrian would have killed to attend back when he was pretending to be someone who mattered. A woman approached me. Young, maybe mid-20s, clearly nervous to be there. She asked where I was from, probably expecting me to name some prestigious East Coast city or impressive university. I smiled and told her the truth. A small farm in Nebraska, best place in the world. She looked surprised. Then she told me she was from a small town, too, that everyone kept telling her she wasn't sophisticated enough for the finance world, that she felt like she didn't belong in rooms like this. I reached into my purse and handed her my business card. I told her that the people who say she doesn't belong are usually the ones most afraid of what she'll accomplish when she proves them wrong. I told her to call my office if she ever needed advice or just wanted to talk. She looked at that card like I had handed her something precious. Maybe I had.